Write Night is a talk show with published authors, writers, and content creators discussing both the creative and technical sides of writing, as well as the industry surrounding it, from novels to screenplays to comics and more. And now, here's your host, author Travis I. Sivart.
Welcome to Write Night. We'll get to the topic and discussion in just a moment. For those listening to the podcast, we record the podcast on our live stream at twitch.tv/Travis Tavern Talk, and we have a live interactive chat audience. You might hear the sound of the bell ding, and that means I want to interrupt somebody to read a comment or question. For those on the live stream, we won't read off everything you put in chat, but we'll try to get to the most relevant, the most amusing, or some combination of the both. Now, while we introduce ourselves, go and let us know what you're reading, writing, or creating tonight. Okay, and as I don't think was mentioned before, I am Travis I. Sivart. Our topic tonight is going to be writing inclusively, or inclusivity in writing, something around there. We'll get to that in a few moments. Right now I want to mention a few books that I have enjoyed writing that work with these concepts, including the Portal series that goes across the board with just all kinds of things, from a black lead, female Hispanic lead, middle-aged Jewish guy lead, as well as Silver and Smith, which is one of my favorite two people to write together because of the way they banter. And Silver is a middle-aged black man bounty hunter, and Hank, Henrietta, is a 20-something archaeologist, and also really good with a scope and a rifle. So anyhow, let me pass this over to Tara to introduce herself, and then our other co-host, Erica, afterwards. Go ahead, Tara.
Hey, I'm Tara Moeller. I am Dreamer-in-Chief at Dream Punk Press. And Dream Punk Press has a few authors that fit into definitely having inclusive characters. We have one author with dyslexia, whose main character has dyslexia, in a fantasy novel, which is something that's a little different. We also have stuff by Mixed Know-It-All for our younger readers that explores just about everybody in the LGBTQIS2 spectrum, as they went through that spectrum themselves. Something that we pride ourselves on is to make sure we are as inclusive as we can. And you can find Mixed Know-It-All's books at www.dreampunkpress.com. Erica.
Hi, my name is Erica Drayton. I go by my author name, which is eldrayton.com, although all my social media is at Erica Drayton. The reason for the initials is a whole long story I won't get into, but I have been writing for almost, I feel like, my entire life, but I've only just recently been self-publishing for maybe the last 5-6 years. And we can go into what I've been writing into more detail, but I will say, for the first time in all of the stories that I'm writing, I am actually writing a main character of color, which might sound surprising, being that I am black, but none of my main characters ever in my past of writing, both short fiction and long, has ever been a character of color. And still to this day, none of my main characters, past or present, has been female. So, which is really, I didn't think of that, but I, just recently I've been thinking about it, because I've been thinking about how I'm going to rebrand myself. And in doing so, I realized, like, I am so off-brand of what I should be based off of what I've been writing my entire life. What is going on? But in any event, you can find my work and what I do on eldrayton.com.
Very good. Now, with this topic tonight, I want to go ahead and cover how we, as Erica started to mention, characters within books, as Tara started to mention, various writers within our circle. We have covered here on Right Now how to be inclusive of new writers from different walks of life and backgrounds and ethnic and cultures and whatnot. Now I want to talk about it in the writing. But that being said, if either of you decide to run off on those other tangents, when we did that show before, we had to cut ourselves off because there's always more to say on that. So in no way will I stop you from talking about that also. So Erica, I want to go right back to you. I am so surprised to hear that you've never written a person of color or a female as a lead before. Was that conscious, or did you just not think about it? And what changed that you're like, wait? Go ahead.
I honestly, it's strange, but I think of the phrase that everyone always says whenever someone comes to them and says, "I want to write a story, but I don't know what to write." And the phrase that I think is said the most is "write what you know."
Right.
Okay, and so again, you look at me and you say, "Well, you must know how to be a woman and be black and be gay." So, what's up with that? I believe that I was writing what I was reading. So when I took the concept of write what you know, I was writing what I
Studied.
knew at the time would sell or would be relatable to the reader picking it up. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I have nothing to base relating being black or being gay or being a woman that I've read, being someone from the 80s, reading books from the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, and even really today, now that we are starting to have more women, more people of color writing from their perspective, writing what they know. But I'm now living in this generation of writing that. I didn't have that. When I think of all of the books and I list them off, something as innocent as, reading Matilda, reading Harry Potter, reading, Amelia Bedelia when I was younger, reading all of these children's books, I was writing what I knew. And to me, everything I was reading was white, be it male or female. So it never, and also I think I didn't want to be that person, similar to when we were talking earlier about I didn't want to be the one asking for something.
Right.
I didn't want to be the one writing a black character and having people say, she's trying to put a little message in there. What's that about? Why do they have to be black? Why does it have to be a woman? What are you throwing a gay character in my face for? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I didn't want to be the mantle or the banner with which to that I didn't want to die on that hill. I said I just want to write a story. So if you want the character that I'm writing to be gay, more power to you. If you want the character that I'm writing, if you want to see them as a black character, Asian, go ahead. Because I was not coloring my characters when I wrote them. I didn't specify that they were white. I didn't specify if they were black. I didn't do a J.K. Rowling and try to say that Hermione was black 20 years later. Even though in her book she's clearly is redhead, curly hair, freckles, not black. Anyway, but I didn't want to specify a skin color and
Right.
apply that. And my stories were not romantic in any way, so I didn't feel it necessary to say that this person had romantic feelings for someone who was of the similar gender.
Right.
Because that's not my thing. And so, but now, moving forward and fast forwarding in a time when all that I am should be what I am writing because it is what is selling. I do question, am I doing it to make the money, or am I doing it because it's a story I want to tell? So while my character is black, it is a boy. It's not a female. So
Here's something I'll say to that. Yeah, you should absolutely write what you enjoy, but also there's nothing wrong with writing to market. If
Right.
young adult is big, nobody complains when somebody writes young adult. And if,
right, but I think young adult is a different
is.
playing field than saying I'm writing black to market, because then you might sound like a sellout. That was the word I was looking for. Will I seem like a sellout to whatever little community wants to come up
I
and
think
say
I think instead you'd
she
sound
only
like
wrote that because she knows that black will sell, or she knows that gay will sell, or she knows that, whatever.
I think instead they would say you're writing from something you've experienced, something you know, something you have authority on. So, and then we could also say, don't care what they think, write what you want. And if that's what you want to write, if that's what's coming out right now, do that.
Hmm.
Do that. Tara, do you have some thoughts on inclusivity in the aspects we're discussing?
Yeah. So under my pen name E.G. Gaddis, which stands for Edwina Georgina, which is thankfully not my real name. um, I wrote Riley for real.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when I wrote it, it was never going to be published. And Riley is a trans character. And I think I've mentioned it, I think before I wrote that for Momo.
Mm-hmm.
And when Momo read it and said, "Oh God, Mom, you understand." I mean, and then they said, "You need to publish this, please." Um, so they wrote my intro and they wrote something at the back because it's in a steampunk world, and binders, true binders, didn't exist, and so Riley wasn't safe with that. But we put the notes in the back so that nobody would think that it was safe. And then as soon as Riley got to the north, up into Scotia in this world where the Duke is also trans,
Right.
and held them up, they got a binder. Um, and that was something that I don't have experience with myself personally,
Mm-hmm.
but I watched my kid go through it. That's who it was originally written for, not ever to publish, but mostly just because I'm a writer. I wrote it for Morven to be able to read it and understand that I get you, honey. I love you no matter what. Um, and then when the second book in the Clan Campbell series came out, because Riley's in those books, and I started, playing around with what was going to be in book two, and Morven's like, "Oh, make Riley in it, make Riley the love interest." Um, but Riley is not first person in that book.
Mm-hmm.
Riley, Sinead is, and Sinead's just pretty much a normal girl, crushed on a guy, um, who, when in the end, when she finds out what the big secret is like, I don't care. And again, and there's been questions. So I think saying, that you're not going to get questions, am I proud of it? Heck yeah. But you're going to get questions, and I will get questions. And when people really ask me, it's like, I'm writing the books I wish my kid had had when they were 14 or 15 and going through this stuff that just have happy endings, and they're not angst, because I'm not writing about um, the transition. I'm writing about a character that is having an adventure and a romance. So.
And if I could jump in, I've got a
Mm-hmm.
comment here from Marlene. Comment followed by a question. Kind of going back to what Erica was saying. If you don't assign, hold on, let me scroll up. It jumped on me. If you don't assign a skin color to a character, I assume readers will, in their mind, match them to their own expectations and experiences. So in my case, as a white person, I probably unconsciously make them white. As a black person, do you mentally also make them black, or are you actually so trained by schooling and other reading to assume that they're white / not like you? Because so much literature is white.
I would say when any story that I've read from childhood to now, I do think I whitewash them. I don't think I've ever been reading a story and in my head made them black, or anything other than just white, unless the cover led me to obviously this is a black character, and so I need to see them in that way. And I think that's why, in a way, I understand what Tara is saying, that I wish I had more of that. And my mother, to her credit, did, inject stories of um, characters of color. However, and unfortunately, when I think back to those stories, they were not happy.
Hmm.
Typically, even the children's stories. I mean, one of my favorite was called Just Like Martin. And it was a story about Martin Luther King from the point of view of a boy who's going to see the speech, the big speech of Martin Luther King on the steps. It is not a happy story. There is a lot of violence that takes place while this boy is taking this journey with his family to see, Dr. Martin Luther King speak, and how he wants to be just like Martin. And this was a young adult book for children. It's just the way that I feel it is today, and it has been in the past, where stories of color are told from a very hard truth, and stories that are not of color are happy, and the purple crayon, and that's just and that's just the way it is. So I don't have any stories that my mother has read to me that were characters of color where I look back on them fondly, but I remember all the ones, all the other ones with
Mm-hmm.
there were no characters of color, but the stories had a happy ending, and I enjoyed them.
That's fair. By the way, Raven says, I totally get where you're coming from, but I really think this could be a great chance for you to shine whatever kind of light you choose to shine. There'll always be someone who'll try to get uppity about something. Everyone is addicted to calling people out, but there will be enough people standing behind you and your writing because you tell great stories. And
That is what I'm hoping to do. And at the end of the day, while I am what you said is writing to market, I hope at the end of the day it's that when someone loves the stories that I release, it's not because the character was black or anything like that, but because the villain was a real badass. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like that's what I want. I don't want it to be like, oh, we must hold up her book on a mantle because all the characters are of color. And the other thing that I am putting in this story, while the main character is a boy, that there is a juxtaposition between genders, in that the women are the leaders and the men are literally used for their strength, and they have no say and no power whatsoever
mm-hmm.
in my story. So there is that gender difference. So I am making women strong and powerful and intelligent and the leaders, and the men are not. But again, at the end of the day, I want the reader to say, "Oh my god, skinwalkers are scary and I had a nightmare about them."
Right.
You know what I mean?
I
Like, I
think.
don't want it to be for the gender thing, I am putting in homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm literally taking all the three things that I normally avoid, all of them are being put into the series that I'm writing, but I am hopeful that that will not be what makes it
Well,
something that readers are drawn to.
I'm guessing, and I could be wrong, so you let me know if I am, that you're not putting him in as the featured highlight of the story. They are parts of the story, elements of the story, but not the message
They
that
are
you're
cultural.
right. You're
Right.
not
It's
pushing them at people. You're like, this is just a thing in my world.
right. This is how this culture, because it's steeped in Native American culture, a
Oh,
lot of it,
nice.
and so they're tribal. So it's two warring tribes, and I'm showing what happens when you have deep traditions in one tribe where you're not going to change them, and where you have a tribe that defects because they don't like those traditions, and how taking those away blurs the lines between genders, so that the men and the women are equal, so that there are gay relationships that take place, whereas in the original tribe, where everything is very strict and very just so, this is how it is and there is no difference. And how the main character gets to experience both worlds
Mm-hmm.
and unites them in the end. But in the midst of that are what I deem to be the main points, which is the evil badass that I am throwing in there. So if that gets So if something else gets superseded from my skinwalkers and my evil villains, I will be very upset. But that is not to say that I'm not putting that I am putting these things in, and I would be a moron not to let people know that these things are there, because I know that people will want to read it because those things are in there and they
True.
probably wouldn't see that anywhere else.
Right.
But again, at the end of the day, like, please, please, please don't ignore my villain. She's really good.
So I love a good villain.
She's really badass.
In support, John of Conquest Publishing says, quote, authenticity and worth, end quote, should be what fans should weigh. But writers and musicians suffer from the selling out issue. And signifiers, the signifiers may apply to our other consumption experience where a clash between inspired and the market worlds exists and the conflicting ethos of. Then he accidentally hit enter. The point is to not allow the market to stop great tales. So, yeah, just, I love how this episode, we started out, let's talk about inclusivity within our writing and our characters and our worlds. And here is the chat, the public, being inclusive and supportive of the things we're kind of worried about. Because, trust me, Tara and I have had these conversations about, if I put a character in, will it be viewed as pandering or just, trying to hit that dollar mark or offend somebody, because it is a stereotype and it's meant to be a stereotype because that's easy to define, especially a third tier character. But there's been these concerns, but it's an easy way to just knock that home real quick with a cliche.
And speaking of on inclusivity, I actually have a question for Tara and for you, Travis, because when I started, I said, write what you know. And so I wonder if there is a double standard in that, because in many ways, when a white author will write a book and the main character is of a different color or gender of the writer, specifically if the writer is white, pandemonium and mayhem. A black writer may write a white character or a character that is not of their gender, and I don't see the same level of outcry, I think. And so I'm wondering if you take that into consideration when you are writing, because you do it which to me I hate, because it's like we want white people to be inclusive of us,
right?
But then when they do the thing, your response is, but you don't know the black struggle, but you don't know the first thing about being gay, or you don't know the first thing about being trans, so who are you to speak on behalf of X?
Right. And
so it's like, how do you navigate those waters?
We've talked about this, and I'm going to let Tara go first. Go ahead, Tara.
So, yeah, because I do not believe that a white person should write a black story. That doesn't mean they shouldn't write a black character. And I know it's hard, and I know I have gotten into arguments with people over this who feel that they should be able to write whatever they want. I follow a lot of black authors on Twitter, and one of the issues that they bring up a lot of times is that when a black author is submitting for publication to one of the big five, their story won't make it, while a story about a black person written by a white person makes it. And what they're getting back via their agent is that, well, they already have their black story and it's written by a white character. So that's where a lot of the uproar comes along, is that for a lot of the big publishers, especially, the black stories that are being put out by white authors. And so I have kind of, in listening to them, I agree with them. When you look at the book, The Hate You Give, a white author could never write that book because they wouldn't understand the character. So then you get Dirt, American Dirt, that was about
Excuse me.
the immigration struggle, the illegal immigrant from somewhere in South America. I've never read the book because I'm boycotting it. Because there was an uproar because it was this big tale of, immigration and the trouble and the pain, written by a white person. Now, the story, I guess, is very, very good. Part of the uproar was the release party decor of barbed wire and, his table decoration. There are white people that just don't get it, that it's not decor. It's not just a story. Somebody has lived that kind of life, and they are coming here for a reason. And I think the big difference is if it is a Black story, if you are telling of Black struggle, of Asian struggle, of Hispanic struggle, you ain't Hispanic, if you aren't Black, there ain't a drop of Asian blood in you, you should not be telling that story. That does not mean that if you're writing a fantasy that you cannot have a character of color in there, because you're not necessarily telling a Black story or an Asian story. And because I'm going to, and I know I have shared this story before. When Morven wrote Fork, which is it's a middle grade novel about a young boy figuring around his sexuality. And they had interest from an agent for it. And not the whole thing. Morven submitted it. Came back from the agent, well, it's really not gay enough. And back and forth and back and forth. And finally, Morven shared the emails with me. And basically what the agent was saying is there's not enough pain in there. There's not enough gay pain in this book, which was semi-autobiographical. And Morven's looking at this going, it's semi-autobiographical, Mom. When I went through this, you and Dad supported me. My friends supported me. On the whole, there were a couple that had some issues, whatnot. But Morven was like, we need these stories too. We don't just need the pain that this cis-het agent wanted. If you're cis-het, you really shouldn't be making decisions on what gay stories are put out because you don't understand them. They're supposed to be painful. You're supposed to suffer, right? Because you're gay. Morven never suffered because they were gay or trans or any of that, because they had a very supportive family. And we need those stories out there just as much as we need the painful stories. And that is an issue that I see. And this is, and because I'm white, I can't express that as something where with the idea of a white person telling a Black story. But I can for this is a non-gay agent gatekeeping a gay story because it wasn't painful, because it was a happy story, because it was a story of support. And it's the same thing is, like you said, a lot of the Black stories that you read when you were young were of pain. And so I think kids need the happy stories too, which is why I have my young adult stuff that I've written that Riley is in. And again, I'm not writing most of those from Riley's point of view, but from a girl who is, for all intents and purposes, she's cis-het, except that when she realizes, and finds out that, okay, Riley is trans, she doesn't care because she still has that feeling and she still likes him and whatever. So there's a difference, I feel, in being inclusive as a writer in that you tell stories that are inclusive, but that you're not telling a story you shouldn't be telling, that you can't
Have experienced personally,
yeah,
or gone through,
I
or
cannot
have a
write
relation to.
about the Black struggle because I am not Black. I can include Black characters in my stories. I could even write a Black main character as long as it's a story
It's a human
of
story.
yeah, a regular human story that's not, but I'm not probably going to write a believable Black character. um,
Okay. Um,
but
any follow-up question to that, Erica, or did that kind of cover it for
No,
you?
that
Okay.
that covered.
Okay. Now we've got a couple minutes left in this
I got on my
episode.
soapbox a little there.
What's that, Tara?
I said I'm sorry. I got on my soapbox a little bit there. It's something that, and
It's we
when
get
I
it.
talk to a lot of other white authors, they get mad at me. And I'm like, no, I don't think we should be telling the stories of Black pain.
Hey, Tara, I'm taking your soapbox away so we can all talk.
Yep.
It's, but no, it's definitely, as you can see, there's passion behind it, there's belief behind it, and it's important things to say and to hear. And like I said, Tara and I and other authors have discussed this on air and off. And yeah, absolutely include all kinds of people in your stories, even as your main characters. But don't write a story that, at least this point in history, belongs to other cultures. It's, and I guess we could even go into that and do a whole hour on that by itself, but we're not going to. We're going to move back to what we have here, which we're talking about being inclusive in your stories. In Portals, as I mentioned, in the first book, there's 3 primary characters in each book. In the first book is a Latina, so a female Hispanic, a 20-something-year-old Black guy who's brought into the world into a brown body. Basically a northern Eskimo race, a barbarian race. It's a fantasy race, so this is the closest comparison I have. And the third one is actually a 77-year-old woman that comes back in the body in the fantasy world of a 16-year-old boy. Now, at the end of the first book, one character leaves and a new character comes in the second book, and that's the 45-year-old frumpy jeweler who's actually got Jewish background that he's ignored. And in the third book, another character leaves at the end of book 2, and in the third book, we get a college debutante straight out of the 60s that comes into the fantasy world. And she is of Italian descent, so she's kind of bigger. She's not a Barbie doll shape. And of course, she was marching civil rights in the 60s, and now she's here dealing with a young Black man from 2023 or 2025. I forget exactly where Torrance is from. But it's fun to play with the dynamics. And when telling that part of the story, of the civil rights, I'm telling it from a college girl's point of view from 40, 50 years in our past to somebody who is 5 years in our future. So that's not only different culture clashes, it's different time clash. They're from different points in history. And I definitely had fun with that. And we're going to take this moment to go ahead and... Oh, you know what? Hold on. Marlene asks, what's your experience around including people with disabilities in stories other than as the misformed evil character or genius in the wheelchair? Marlene, this young Black man that I'm talking about in Portals, on Earth, before he went to the fantasy world, he was in a car accident and he lost the use of his legs, paralyzed from the waist down. And this changed. He was a star athlete in high school, heading towards a promising college career. And this is 3 years after that. And he goes into this fantasy world. And there are moments where he is still bitter about, his future in the other world having been ruined by this accident. but now he's in this world, and it's interesting to play with that adjustment. And there were moments where I hesitated because, again, I want to tell a story that feels true, which in my head is most of us, most human beings, are bitter about something, and we're always like, why me? Not always, a lot of us. So I wanted that element in there without being a jerk about the fact that this guy is in a wheelchair because of this accident. What about you guys? Anything with this sort of thing in your work?
Yeah, in my world, I mean, I feel like this story is really a coming out for me because I'm
Mm-hmm.
putting things in here that I've never done before. And one of the things I did want to go into was the idea of disability and the idea that being disabled doesn't mean useless or incapable. And so again, in my cultural tribe, if you are someone who is blind or um, doesn't have the use of a limb for whatever reason due to accident or birth defect, what they do is they train you to heighten your other senses and your other abilities so that someone who is blind actually has the best hearing you could possibly imagine. And so they are actually taken when they go hunting because they can hear things that everyone else can't because they're too distracted by the ability of seeing what's before them. And so I'm playing with the idea that while there is a disability, it's not like a futuristic story. So I can't put in things like they have a wheelchair or something like that. I mean, the most that they have is a shaman who has, certain potions and things, but that's about it. But I did want to include that there is, this idea that you will or can be disabled for one way or another. I have a character who was in a coma for so long that when he woke up, he lost 16 years of his life, and so he has to live with that, with the memory, with the loss of who his mother and father are because they died. He was just in a coma, but the accident caused them to die and him to forget they ever existed. And so there are just different types of disabilities that either they were born with or something accidental happened to them, and how they can take those and manifest them into something that's beautiful and that's helpful to the tribe, and not just set to the side and said, well, you're disabled, so you can't help us fight, you can't help us hunt, you can't help us cook, you can't do anything, just sit over there and be disabled.
Very good. Tara?
So
Mm-hmm.
J.M. Silverleaf has dyslexia. She's one of our authors. And her main character in Creed of the 21 Dragons, that series, is a mage with dyslexia, and it screws with her magic. And while dyslexia is never said because nobody knows what it is, she just thinks there's a problem with her magic because it's rune based, so you have to get the runes right. And she has a special orb that helps decipher them, and interpret them for her and get them in the right way. So she has a device that helps her to use her magic. It doesn't increase her magic, it doesn't do anything, it's just a device to help. And of course, Jill came to us because we use Open Dyslexic Font when we publish. It's one of our options. We publish two issue versions of every novel now, one in a traditional font and one in Open Dyslexic. But it's very, very interesting to read that novel and to edit it, because there's there's a disability there, and it's not something that you usually see in fantasy novels. Personally, I have a manuscript that's been sitting for a while, because it's about a female Marine who's lost a leg. And while I want to put it out there, it was inspired, working at Quantico. The Marines are big with Wounded Warrior, and they have things there all the time. They have Wounded Marines still, run triathlons and the whole thing. And so it was kind of inspired by that, but I haven't published it yet. And most of it, she's just pissed that it ended her Marine Corps career, because that's what the couple of the females that I got to meet at one point, with that, that's what pissed them off the most. I mean, they're just, maybe it's because they're Marines, but just a different attitude there. But we need to see that more. We need to see more kids, more characters, so that where everybody is represented.
And if I can read a couple comments, because they so relate to what you just said, so this is a great place to pop them in. Marlene says, I think it's important to show that stories including disability don't just focus on how that's a negative struggle, as I would think many people living with it should also be able to see a positive world. They probably spend enough energy on negative thoughts, on their real life struggles. I guess inclusion should mean everyone being welcome to take a dive into other worlds. And John of Conquest Publishing says, I recommend folks go down to the hospital and interview the people there. I go to CHKD, for anybody that's not familiar with it. It's I'm not sure exactly what it stands for. What are you saying, Tara?
I do.
Go ahead.
Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters.
Thank you. To pass out coloring pages and always go away in awe about these people's take on the situation. So yeah, that's another important thing to include. All these things, put them in there and be sensitive, be reasonable. But a saying from probably 10, 20 years ago, representation is important. And that's kind of been moved aside now as things move forward. But I still think of that, and it is still important. I've had so many discussions with people who remember the first time they saw, whether it was Black Panther recently or 40 years ago in comic books, and they said, there's somebody like me. Now, those same people also still ran out there being Captain America and Batman, no matter what skin color they were, because when you're a kid, you're playing. But that representation is important, and to be inclusive in that is more. It serves the story, perhaps, but it also serves so much more than the story. It serves so many more people out there. Tara, do you have some closing thoughts? Pass it to Erica, and then I'll take us out of this.
You need to make your fictional world represent the real world, and people of color exist. People with disabilities exist. People who are queer exist. And while and they don't always have to be your main character, but hey, put them in the story. It will make it real.
Erica?
I actually just thought of Garrett in this moment, Garrett Robinson, and I just wanted to give a little plug to him. He's an indie author. He's written 15, I believe, novels, and all of them have characters who are gay, who are transgendered, who are disabled. He makes a huge point to make sure that all of the non-white male is in his stories, that they are main characters and that they are living, breathing. So I would love to just mention his name. And he also, sought me out to write in his world because he wants to have gay authors write under his world. He wants to have Black authors writing under his world. He wants to expand it like the Marvel DC universe. That's his grand scheme, and have everyone who writes under it be someone who is a minority so that he can raise them up and give us a platform with which to write about these things. And so Garrett Robinson, he writes Underrealm. That is his world. It's called Underrealm. And I recommend you all go take a look at his stuff because it's filled with nothing but lesbian love and gay love and trans love and all that good stuff.
There you go. Excellent. If you ladies will say good night to everybody, I'll take us out.
Bye.
There we go. Before we go, I want to remind everyone that you can email us at rightnightshow@gmail.com. That's right with a W, night with an N, show@gmail.com. To let us know your thoughts on the show's topic, suggest other topics you'd like to hear us discuss, or just have a message read out on air to someone in your life. Thanks to everyone for supporting the show by downloading the podcast, sharing it on social media, grabbing some shirt stickers and mugs from bit.ly/tavern merch, or barware patches and hats from bit.ly/tavern merch too. It's bit.ly/tavern merch or tavern merch followed by the number 2. Thanks to everyone who joined us live at twitch.tv/Travis Tavern Talk, and everyone who supports the tavern by subscribing, hosting, throwing bits, raids, and most of all, commenting.
Thank you for joining author Travis I. Sivart and the other writers, content creators, and all-around amazing people for our discussion here on Right. Join us again soon, and until you do, make sure you create with passion, enjoy the journey, and remember, every night can be right enough.